Now, from what seems to be just, a social media hashtag, all of a sudden it snowballed into a nationwide protest. Now, do you think lessons have been learned, over the past 3 years, even after that?
There's no simple answer, yes and no. Lessons have been learned on both sides. On the side of the protesters, the young Nigerians that came out to protest, two things, I think two core things stand out. One is that whenever they speak up or they demand change, it's not going to be an easy process, as we saw with the violence that followed the protest. So I think young Nigerians are no longer delusional about the kind of force or what it will take to effect change in Nigeria. There are other interesting far-reaching impacts about how some people have given up on the country. So that's another impact of the NSAS protest. In terms of the government, I wouldn't say I don't know if lessons have been learned, because there isn't substantial evidence to prove that perhaps lessons have been learned on the part of the government. And I say this because accountability is not as great. For example, a lot of states, 29 states, established judicial panels across the country after NSAS protests to look into the abuses. Some of them did not publish reports, and only Lagos states, to a certain extent, worked on the recommendations of each panel. So it's not looking like any lesson has been learned per se. Accountability is very minimal. So on the part of the government, I'll say no. But on the part of the protesters, a bunch of things have been learned.
Now, of course, let's talk about the core, of the protest itself, the reason that the protest happened in the first place. How do you think the NSAS movement has influenced the conversation, particularly around police brutality in Nigeria?
Well, first of all, I'll say that one thing the NSAS protest did was it brought it more to light. So a lot of people are already aware of police brutality in general, but like with the force that the NSAS protest came, it made people even more aware of just like the existence of police brutality. So that's one thing that it did. Another thing was that it started very important conversations, not just in Nigeria, even like across the globe, in Africa, about police reforms. Because if you notice, like if you remember during the NSAS protest, one of the leading conversations then was about the importance of like paying police officers well, reforming the police, like how it's going to be a long game. So I think it just really brought those conversations to light and made people more aware of how, important it is like to reform the police and the kind of work that it's going to take to effect change, essentially.
Now, some of the opinion that the protest actually maybe shouldn't have happened in the first place because of the fallout. Now, even private citizens, some will tell you that they lost a lot in terms of property and even personal, bodily harm. Do you share that particular opinion to that maybe the protest shouldn't have happened in the first place at all?
I think one thing I'll say is that with every protest, there's always some form of fallout. It's like the gravity that varies. But like, if you remember, like past protests with Occupy Nigeria, for example, in 2012, there was like a fallout. It's very, especially in Nigeria, historically, it's been very, very rare for a fallout not to exist like with protests. That being said, I think it's not an easy question to answer. I do want to say that I'm glad that the protest happened because, like I said earlier, it brought to light like really how crazy like police violence had been existing in the country since SARS had been established in 1992. I have some regrets because people died, a lot of lives were lost, like it's very painful, heartbreaking, and some families are still looking for bodies up till today. So in that regard, it does hurt me that the process went that way. But I don't think I would say personally, since that's what you asked, that it shouldn't have happened. I would just say that lessons have been learned.
Where do you think, it went wrong in terms of organization? I mean, this conversation still keeps, ongoing, that probably at some point the organizers, if at all, there, there were any, should have known when to withdraw and then go to the negotiation table. There are a lot of conversations. What do you think actually went wrong, if at all, during the process itself?
I wouldn't say that the organization of the protest was wrong. I think I think it was quite well organized, and in fact, a lot of people would argue that that is one of the best parts of the protest. The organization was super. What I would say in terms of what should have happened was that we should have had more dialogue between the government and the protesters. And when I say more dialogue, not in the approach that the government was going for. For example, the government was looking for maybe the leader of the protest, the face of the protest, so that they could interface with, that said leader. But what should have happened was saying that the protesters didn't have any leader, as they continued to say throughout the protest. What should have happened, for example, should have been a town hall dialogue, for example, not in the way where, for example, the president addressed us from Abuja. It didn't feel like we were close, like the government was listening, like the president and the IGP were listening. We should have had town halls. We should have had serious, bullet points for accountability and reforms, like, hey, this is what is going to happen. So I don't think it's in the organization of the protest. I think it's in the reaction of the government that the problem occurred, because there is no way, like no planet where it's okay to react by killing citizens. Dialogue should have been the way forward, at least the first step.
Now, talking about also the fallout of the protest, do you think that in any way we've seen people come out to ask for justice, particularly people that claimed they lost their lives, they lost properties? Some even said that they were able to identify some hoodlums who they think, hijacked the process and maybe are still roaming around. Do you think that closure, has happened, or if at all not, will it ever happen?
I think that closure hasn't happened. I think that it was a good start, but somehow along the way, we stopped in the middle of getting closure. And I say this because I say good start because, we had those judicial panels and people actually came and told their stories. And there was it felt like there was a listening ear, if you know what I mean. And there was a bit of reconciliation on that part. And even with the recommendations of some of those panels, even though a lot of the recommendations have not been implemented, but you could sort of feel like reconciliation was kind of happening. And somehow we just lost the plot along the way when those recommendations didn't happen, when further conversations just ceased to exist. So I would say that we were on a good path, but somehow we lost it, and accountability hasn't happened in the way that it should happen, and justice still has not been served. Yes, some families have closure, but the overwhelming majority don't. So I wouldn't count that as a success.
Now, you're a journalist, of course. I believe that you were very much active around during that particular period. Now, can you just share some personal experiences or stories, from the protest that actually left a lasting impact on you?
I was covering the protest a lot. One of the interesting, I would say, things that I noticed, more like heartbreaking, but interesting because of the manner in which it happened, were just the kind of stories. I know that in the Lekki Ikoyi protest, for example, I remember witnessing a couple of older women, supporting the younger ones, which for we know that the protest was overwhelmingly young. So it was very strange and interesting to see them. And the stories that they told me were very interesting. A woman talked about how she had lost 2 of her sons in Rivers State, to police brutality. And she said that every time she hears that there's a protest, she attends. So she lives in Rivers State, but she was in Lagos. She told me that she was going to go to Oshogbo, I think 2 days after. So it was a very interesting thing to see, like the power of, shall I say, like a mother who just keeps attending random protests because of what happened to her personally. I thought that was very heart-wrenching, but also interesting and touching.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Aisha Salaudeen, a journalist.
Thank you for
once again, thank you.
Bye.